Okay, so Kate, I think the first question for you is how did you get started in cashmere and what do you do in the industry now?
Sure. So I did a degree in knitting at University of Leeds, or actually a degree in textile design, and specialised in knitting, mainly because I didn't like putting patterns into repeat, like printed patterns,
Right.
which is ironic because now I do quite a lot of repeats with jacquards and cables. And I also walked up once and went never again on a weaving loom. So I specialised in knit, and then my first job actually was as a sort of, I think Americans might call it adjunct professor, like teaching people how to use the machines. And so I only really know how to use knitting machines. I can barely hand knit and don't really enjoy it. Or like if someone wanted a hand knitting project from me, I would say, here's some other places to go. And then I was all set for an academic career and was going to do a PhD, and then realised that I wanted to go and work in the industry. So I moved to New York City, and one job led to another, and then I got a job in a cashmere supplier, which led to another job in a cashmere supplier, and I wound up working for 4 years for a big cashmere supplier called DZ, as the Americans call it. And we supplied cashmere for Saks, Barney's, Nordstrom's, sort of the top, the big department stores. And then I moved back to London and met my American husband in London. And they said, we're starting a London office, would you like to help us? So I worked for them in London, and we worked with like the top end of the British high street, so merino and cashmere blends. And I have now been freelance for nearly 3 years, working with startup brands, small independent brands, and I love it.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a cool niche to end up in. So is it a lot about sourcing the cashmere and kind of helping them decide where to get it? What kind of cashmere that
Yeah, so a lot of times people come to me with an idea, and I am the how bit of the question. So they'll come to me and say, I want to start a brand based on gardens. I've done that. So right now on my books, I have a sustainable sock project, a guy that wants to do like bodybuilding apparel, and he wants it bigger through the chest and shoulders, and another woman who's a really good hand knitter and doesn't know how to translate that into machine knit patterns. So what I really love about freelancing is that at any given point I can be working on 5 or 6 different things that are completely different, which of course sometimes can get a bit too much. Oh, and I'm also doing a modest wear collection.
Oh,
so knitted hijab. Yeah.
Nice.
So that's what I truly love about it, is the real variety of stuff. And I don't just do cashmere, I do all sorts of things as long as they're knitted.
Knitted. Gotcha. So, okay, so I'm going to do a tangent because you just asked the question. What is the most unusual fabric that you have knitted or have seen in a knit?
Interestingly, I was just listening to your lace podcast. I actually did part of my degree collection at Leeds was on knitted devore, so knitted lace, and then I put the chemicals on. So I knitted wire with cotton, and then I added the alkaline chemicals to burn out the cotton, the chemicals, and then put it in the oven and heated it up to burn it out. And that's one thing. I have an ex-student who is working on mushroom fibers for architecture.
Mushroom is like a big deal because
it's huge.
Apparently vegan leather. Mushrooms make very good vegan leather, which I love of. But there's a whole, and I mean, the New York Times Fashion did a whole piece on, I think it's called MycoWorks. It's the name of the company that they featured. But yeah, mushrooms.
Right. Yeah. And you can get yarn made from algae. You can get yarn made from banana skins. You can get yarn made, you can have quite reasonably common. You can get yarn knitted with silver, which has like antimicrobial properties. So yeah, there is a whole world out there of
I know. I feel like, I do the podcast, and every season I choose a broad topic. And I think it's really fun because, again, I get some variety, but I always want to go deeper because I always feel like there's this whole world and I just barely scratch the surface. And it's so interesting.
Yeah.
There's only so much you can do in a 20-minute podcast. But for Cashmere specifically, so, our first season, we had an episode about Cashmere. And again, just scratching the surface. But I think it would be really interesting to kind of talk about, because Cashmere is wool from goats. What I thought was super interesting is it's not the outer wool, it's like the inner wool. So do you want to talk a little bit about the process of cashmere and the differences between maybe getting a higher end cashmere and something you can get on sale at Macy's or something like that?
Yeah. So the cashmere goat will grow two kinds of fiber, the guard fiber and the stuff that we call cashmere fiber. And the reason that we love the cashmere fiber is it's fine in micron and it's long in length. And that means it can be twisted into a yarn which doesn't pill very much. And I think off the top of my head, A grade is 35 mil, 34 to 36 mil, and 14 to 16 micron. So really fine. And so interestingly, nobody ever admits cashmere is graded. So A grade would be that, and then a B grade would be a thicker, shorter fiber. Nobody has ever once admitted to me having B grade fibers. So everybody.
And yet they go somewhere, right?
Yeah, like cashmere goats can't only grow A grade fibers. So about 10, 15 years ago, there was a massive explosion of cashmere, which you touched on your previous podcast, has led to environmental issues in Mongolia because goats are not very nice grazers. And additionally, they have pointy hooves which pierce the topsoil. Also, I don't know if you've seen in the news lately, but there's a massive storm happening in Mongolia right now. They're having their worst winter in 50 years. So cashmere cost is looking to go up, I would say, in the next couple of years. So one interesting side fact, you get vintages in cashmere fibre like you do in wine. So the goats are affected if it's a warm, wet winter or a cold, dry winter. And so usually the fibre producers will blend across years so you get a consistent product. So side note, my husband works in wine and we've found similarities between cashmere and wine.
It's so much, I guess I wouldn't. I mean, it makes perfect sense when you think about it because they're animals and their production of the wool is going to differ if they are stressed or hungry or cold. But I wouldn't have actually thought of that on my own.
Yeah, no, I didn't know that until quite recently. So yeah, they'll blend, I don't know, like a 2022 with 2024 so that they cross, they mix consistent. And then
so how did they actually, how do you make cashmere? Like I have a general understanding of how to make wool from growing up in a small town that did like farm days, and I watched somebody clean it and process it and spin it. Cashmere seems like a little bit different because I've seen people shear sheep and it's just a one big across the back, like you're not separating necessarily.
So you can shear them or you can comb them.
Okay.
The goats, that is. So you can comb out the finer fibers, and you will still obviously get some guard fibers, and then it needs to be cleaned and scoured. So when it comes off the goat, it's all kind of greasy and nasty, and basically you want to wash all that out, and then you comb it and comb it and comb it so that the tough fibers come out, and you're just left with the finest fibers. And then they are again combed. So if you've ever seen a spinning gin, it's basically lots and lots of rollers with combs on them. So you're basically going to get all the fibers going in the same direction, and then that's called the top, and then you can twist that into a yarn. So when you see people, one of the things, you either have a Z twist or an S twist, and when you see 2-ply yarn, most yarns, if you get into yarn counts, will be 2 something. So the most common one for like a sort of normal sweater weight is a 226 or 228s, and that is the amount in grams per 1,000 meters.
Oh, okay, that's a very specific measurement.
Yeah, it's called new. So basically, they pull off 1,000 meters, and then they weigh it, and that's how you get the 226. So it means there's 26 grams in 1,000 meters. And that's, so I often, again, when people come to me, they're looking for that kind of insight where I can be like, oh, you want this weight, so that's going to be a 226 yarn. And then I keep yarn books of all the different colours, and this is sort of a general, so something like that.
Oh yeah, all the colours, different weights,
all the colours, all the different weights. And then I will work with different factories all around the world. So I'll offer source. When I say sourcing, I'll say oftentimes people will say I want to have Italian production or Nepalese or Chinese, and I have factories all around the world that I can recommend to work with and put them in touch with those factories. So usually what I do is design what's called a tech pack, which is like the FAQ instructions for your sweater. So how high is the cuff? What construction is the cuff? What's the measurement across the chest? The weight? Are you going to have different patterns? All sorts of different things like that. So I do the tech pack, and then once that's done, I usually help them. I like to say it's a bit like going and house hunting, or you're not going to have, say, the perfect factory in the perfect place for the perfect price. There will be some compromise there, but I'll help guide you through those decisions.
Right.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating. After the fibers come off the goat and it's all combed and everything, I remember reading there's kind of a treatment process that it goes through, because cashmere won't last forever unless you kind of give it a little bit of help.
Yeah.
With that, and again to kind of make it a little more antimicrobial, maybe. I mean, is this kind of a known thing where they treat it in various different ways? And I think I was reading that like some of it is chemicals, but there's some that you can do like plasma irradiation with cashmere.
I've never heard of that.
I think I'm just research purposes.
Yeah, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but no one's ever said, oh, we've got great cashmere, it's been plasma treated. Generally, so you also need to generally dye cashmere at the fiber stage rather than the yarn stage, because the dye take up is better at fiber stage. And
I guess that makes sense if it's not all like wrapped together.
If you've yarn dyed something, you're more likely to get pilling issues. So another of my favorite topics is pilling and how and why and how to reduce it.
So tell us why. Why does my sweater? They have those like little things that you can like shave it off. That just seems like you're shaving off your sweater. So
so basically, the little fibers come out of the yarn and they attract together. So positive and negative ions attract together, and then they form the little balls. So you can coat it with silicone, but I don't really like that because it feels kind of soapy. But it's there's sort of this whole interplay of how tightly you twist the yarn, how tightly you knit the yarn, the impact that has on the price versus, and how soft you want it to feel. So if it feels softer, it will probably pill more. So if it's been tightened, so I would actually recommend buying a probably more expensive piece of cashmere that has been more tightly knit together on a tighter tension with a more tightly spun yarn that then will soften as you wash it with time.
Right. Wash it, but do not dry it, right? Like cashmere shrinks.
Do not dry it.
Do we know why cashmere shrinks more than like wool or other fibers? Is it just something inherent in the fiber that just responds to the...
So both wool and cashmere have scales on them. So if you look at them under the microwave, you can see the scales, which is the same as our hair. So all the same, it's all protein fibers. And they're also hydrophilic, so they expand with water. So when the fiber gets wet, it gets bigger. And when it expands, then the scales start to interlock together, and that's why they shrink. So they lock in together, and it's mechanical. You can't unshrink it.
Yes, no, you can. No, I have learned that one. You cannot unshrink cashmere sweater. No matter how much you want to try to stretch it or whatever.
It's not. You can't sort of make the stitches come back. It's to do with the fiber itself.
That's so interesting.
So you can do it deliberately. You can deliberately felt the cashmere. There's factories that specialize in that. There's, whole ways of doing that as well.
So no matter how soft the cashmere, it still always itches for me. Is that just a me thing, or is cashmere, because it's inherently a wool, just going to have a certain amount of texture, feel to it?
The softness, when you feel the softness, when you're like, oh, that's so soft, you're feeling the little tiny fibers coming up from the yarn and from the stitch. So that, I guess, is where the itchiness comes in.
Have you felt the raw fibers from the goat? Do they feel soft, or is it the processing that makes them so soft?
I don't think I have felt the raw fibers. Yeah. I've been to a number of cashmere factories, or if I have, it's been a while. Good point. Yeah. I think it would probably feel greasy.
Yeah.
The animal skin oils, unprocessed wool feels greasy and smells like
terrible,
sheep.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I guess if you like sheep smell.
Well, yeah.
I'm not gonna judge.
I've definitely touched untreated sheep wool, and that's not very nice at all. And full of sticks and bits.
Yeah, I was gonna say things get caught and
yeah.
You mentioned before sort of the environmental impact of cashmere. I wonder if you could talk about that and the impact of climate change on the cashmere industry, right? Because as you said, right now Mongolia is having a really bad winter, and that will probably impact production. So kind of it's a two-edged sword there.
Yeah. So yes, there is a problem with overgrazing in Mongolia and Inner Mongolia, which are the two main areas that produce cashmere. As I understand it, so the goats, it's kind of chicken and egg that the goats like things really cold. Cashmere goats have over millennia developed these coasts to deal with the really cold winter. I was talking to as far as I know, the only cashmere in the US company a few months ago, and they were saying it's not necessarily to do with its genetics as well, obviously. So if we were to suddenly move to Mongolia, we wouldn't start growing more hair to deal with it.
Right.
So it's genetics, and then over the millennia they've developed these coats. And then overgrazing. So one of the things I always talk about with my clients is using SFA approved cashmere, which means that the herders have had a good price, they've been treated fairly. They in turn have signed up to a code of conduct about how the goats have been treated, and that supply chain has all been taken care of.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you thought there was truly sustainable cashmere.
I think,
because to me it can be, right? Like wool, it's regenerated. It's not silk where you're killing the silkworm. It's not leather where the animal's got to be dead, right? Like it could be, but the question is it?
Yes, and a number of large, like Stella McCartney, Patagonia, have signed up to not use any virgin cashmere, so they only use recycled cashmere. And so that is also a growing area where they basically pull apart the cashmere sweaters and then respin that into new yarn. So literally you have there's a factory in Pakistan where they'll literally have a mountain of black sweaters and a mountain of red sweaters and a mountain of blue sweaters, so that it stays dyed, but the colors are pretty vibrant.
Yeah, it seems like that the cashmere will hold the dye for a pretty substantial amount of time, so it's not like they're going to fade or
and then there's also people now commercially dyeing with herbs.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Anything else that you want to tell us about cashmere? Do you think that the listeners would know any fun facts or?
Thanks. Yes. If you're washing your cashmere and you don't have any woolite, you have a bottle of shampoo that you don't enjoy on your hair, you can use that.
Oh, that does make sense. Yeah.
So if you've got a bottle of shampoo, I don't know, I often seem to have shampoo that winds up in my bathroom.
Or get the bottle from the hotel, like one of your trips, you have an extra.
You don't like it on your hair, but it's designed for protein fibers.
Such a good tip, because I imagine that regular laundry detergent is not the best for something like cashmere.
So you don't want to use anything with bio in it because that's got protease and that will break down the protein fibers. So nothing that says bio or anything that proclaims it will get rid of stains is usually a bad thing.
Ah, okay. I'm going to have to rethink my sweater washing now. I don't personally own that much cashmere. Because like I said, I find it itchy, even like really soft. And we've been living in a place where cashmere just wasn't really needed. It's so warm. And where we've been living doesn't get that cold. And so like all my wool sweaters, I'm like, I don't wear these anymore.
Oh, well, I do most days. So,
yeah.
But I often wear like an underpiece thing.
Yeah, that's a smart idea. Recommendations for storage. My wool sweaters got eaten by something. So what's your best recommendation for storage of fibers so that you don't get don't be food for moths or silverfish or whatever?
I do have moths are a fact of life. So they're attracted to sweat and skin cells. So it's that fine line between washing regularly and then not washing too much. So I'm probably in the next month or so going to wash all my cashmere with shampoo. And then I also have a drying rack that makes a big difference. So you can get them, I think mine's from the Container Store. It's basically a net on a frame and then they dry flat. And then if you're really worried about moths, put them in the freezer for a few days. And that kills,
So smart. Because that you can get all the mothballs are that's a whole thing.
Yeah.
But
I use cedar oil.
Yeah, cedar oil, but for for someone like me who's kind of scent sensitive, like I don't necessarily want that like permeating into my clothes. So freezing it. Oh, that's a really smart suggestion. I love this. This whole episode is going to be like tips and tricks for your cashmere.
Tricks laundry. I put on social media fairly recently about the shampoo thing, and people were like, "That's crazy."
Yeah, but when you think about it, you're like, "Well, of course that makes sense. That's their hair. If we use it for our hair, it probably will."
Yeah.
I think. I think people. Those of us who are not in the industry like you can get very easily divorced from where this comes from, right? Like where it's the same way we can kind of get divorced of where our food comes from or anything like that. And so it's nice to sit down and talk with people like you to kind of remind us like this is where this all starts. It starts with an animal, a goat, and this is their hair. It's part of their their protection, and then it gets turned into this fiber that's then used for your clothes, and it's really cool. So to Mongolia to see the goats. Go see the goats.
I really want to go, and I was going to go when I was in China about 10 years ago, and we were there. We were in the Dongguan office, and the China office lady was like, "You're going to get snowed in," and I checked the weather on my phone, and it was -23. It's cold. It's really, really cold.
Look, anything below 0 on both scales is like, it's cold still.
Yeah. So we didn't, and it is a regret, but maybe one day it's on my bucket list for sure.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Kate, this has been such a fun conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and all your knowledge around cashmere. And I hope we get to chat again. If you learned something new, please pass it on to a friend by sharing the podcast. And don't forget to click that subscription button. Nothing is more satisfying than a good click. LuxeSci Podcast is an Erevna Media production, produced by me, Dr. Lex. Audio engineer is Dr. Dimos, and our theme music is Harlequin Mood by Burdy. You can find us all over social media at LuxeSci Pod. Feel free to drop us a line. We always love to hear from you. Until next time.